Yes, thank you very much, Ritsun. Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing great. I am Spiros Paparizos. I'm from Wageningen University. I'm working in the domain of water and climate information services, and I'm also coordinating the SAFE4ALL project. Today, I will talk to you about the Drop Up, which is a community-informed tool. Within the SAFE4ALL, I have two hats, the hat of the coordinator, but also the hat of the tool developer. And I will share with you in the next 15 minutes my experiences with working with communities to co-design the Drop Up. I'm looking at controlling the screen. I requested control. Yes. All right. When it comes to community engagement, and this is a question for you, you can write in the chat a few things, yes or no. Do you think that engaging with communities and stakeholders is important when it comes to designing climate information services? I see a lot of yeses coming in. I don't see a no. So I think everyone understands the importance of community engagement. Let's see why this is important. Now, when we first started thinking or conceptualizing climate information services, the first generation of services, we all thought from a top-down approach. And by top-down, I mean we as scientists, we used the vast amount of hydrological and climate observations we had in our disposal. We put it as inputs in our climate models, in our impact models. We ran our models. By we, I mean experts, scientists, academics. We developed our scenario. We made the data analysis. We did the multimodal assessment. And then in the end, we as scientists cared about how the visualization should be or how this should be presented in the user. Thinking from a top-down perspective, you need to have this information. And then that ended up from a model to a product. However, along the way, this caused a usability gap. And usability gap, as you see in the image, is very characteristic. From one side is the climate knowledge suppliers. That could be researchers or academics or climate scientists or experts working around climate change issues. And on the other side is the stakeholders that they demand information from a climate service. And these are decision makers, this is the private sector, these are citizens, people that they don't necessarily have the knowledge to understand the data and the visualizations that will come in from the supply chain. The graph is very characteristic, and we have a cloud of hydrologists giving information into some lines to a decision maker, and the decision maker arguably asks, I'm sorry, I don't understand this picture. How much is what you're saying to me that it will happen? So this usability gap is the unsuitability to inform the decision-making processes in relation to adaptation against the climate change. Now, we're trying to turn it around. From the first generation of services, we move to the second generation of climate services, that the information is to be shared from a bottom-up approach. We follow the concept of not of this is the information that you need, but we ask the users, what kind of information do you need in order to improve your decision making? So we still have a vast amount of data, hydrological and climate data. We still run our models. But when it comes to visualization and interface and scenario development, we put the user in the middle. We try to harness the knowledge that they have, the observations that they might have, in order to co-create locally specific and climate and weather information services that they are tailored to their contextual needs. We aim to give them not just another form of information, but we aim to give them actionable knowledge in order to help them improve their decision making. Now, another question for you. How can we design our services? I would like to hear your ideas on the chat. We talked about the importance of following a bottom-up approach. Meanwhile, I will continue my presentation and feel free to write your ideas on the chat. Now, when we're thinking about co-designing climate information services or participatory services. For me, it incorporates three components. The first component that I will talk to you about more today is the importance of stakeholder engagement. The second is that we need to use all the innovations in information and communication technologies. And the third component is that we need to think not in terms of providing information, but providing knowledge upon which stakeholders could act in order to do more informed decision making. Now, the first component, stakeholder engagement. Why it is important? Engaging with stakeholders really gives you to understand what kind of information is relevant for the end users. Myself, as an academic from the global north, from the Netherlands, I could make a lot of thoughts about how a smallholder farmer, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa or in Southeast Asia would want to see the information that I provide. But I could debate a lot about all these questions, but if I ask them, I'm going to get direct answers from them. And I'm going to get the exact answers that I need to use for my tool, for my climate information service. Engaging with stakeholders helps build trust. I assume that trust is a keyword for everything that we do around the climate information services, and is the most important element to have. Trust when you want to work with stakeholders that they come from different cultural, geographical, religious, and so on backgrounds. It also includes active engagement on the arena. A lot of people talk about stakeholder engagement, but sometimes it's one sort of on the field or one webinar and they consider it stakeholder engagement. You need to be active on the field on multiple amount of times and period in order to be able to really understand the knowledge that these people have and also understand how you can harness it in order to jointly co-develop services and at the same time build the capacity or mobilize the capacity of stakeholders to uptake the services in the longer term, because you understand that we cannot be cannot spend our whole lives on the field. We need to move on in other things. So it's important that something stays on the ground, and building the capacity of individuals ensures in many times that this will be uptaken in the longer term. At the same time, you need to follow a multi-sector and multi-actor approach. For me, when it comes to climate services, there's a role for everyone to play, and it's very good to identify all of these roles and who does what from an academic point of view, from a private, from a governmental, and so on. Now, number two is innovations in information and communication. I will skim through this slide because the important part is the stakeholder engagement. When it comes to innovation in ICT, we have in our society recently a lot of knowledge sharing platforms, virtual communities. In the ICT tools that we have, there's a lot of possibilities for interaction, not only providing information, but receiving feedback from the users. At the same time, we are evolving our capability to predict weather in the short term in a very fine spatial scale. And all this would give us more local scale information. And at the same time, with capacity building, one of the aspects would be to enhance digital literacy of people. A lot of people that we work in the Global South do not have high literacy levels, but they are very clever enough to understand the latest technology and where they can find information if they are shown to them. Now, when it comes to adaptive decision-making, I described you before the difference between information, provision of information, and provision of knowledge upon which people could act. And there's also a lot of dynamics. For example, there's the individual decision-making, what you do as a person, but there's also the collective decision-making, what your community does. For me, climate services is an adaptation option or strategy or measure, but climate change adaptation above all is a matter of governance. Is what kind of public and private partnerships you build within your network, what types of institutional certainties you identify, and in the end, you want that everyone has a role and hybridize the concept of climate services. Now, I'm going to put all these things into perspective, and I'm going to talk to you about the drop-up, which is a hydroclimate information service for smallholder farmers in the global south. But while I'm saying so, those from sub-Saharan Africa or from any other place in the world, when it comes to weather forecasting, short-term weather forecast, how do you do it? Do you read an app? Do you see the weather forecast? Is there something else? I'm very happy to hear your thoughts. And while you're writing, I should spoil what happens in sub-Saharan Africa. In sub-Saharan Africa, what we see, besides, of course, now recently the conventional weather forecast that comes from the Met offices and what the younger generation couldn't find on smartphones and other types of information like radio. We saw when we first engaged in sub-Saharan Africa that there was a lack of scientific forecast information. And we saw a lot of people using indigenous or local ecological indicators or traditional indicators in order to do operational decision making. And these indicators are based on astronomy, on plants or animals. And this slide is very characteristic. We also have a paper associated with that where we identified more than, only in literature, published literature, more than 1,400 indicators in more than 70 regions of the world where people use these ecological indicators in order to do adaptive or operational decision making, from the behavior of the goats in the US to a vast plurality of indicators in sub-Saharan Africa, as you see, Zimbabwe, Ghana, hotspots, Kenya, and many other places on the world. Now, the drop-up is a climate service that provides location and time-specific information and incorporates, as we say, the best of both worlds. It provides scientific weather forecast information based on numerical weather prediction models for 1 day, for 7 days, and 14 days in advance. But at the same time, it asks the user to provide their own indigenous weather forecast based on local agrometeorological indicators that the users predict on the field, observe on the field. This is an example. We first started in Ghana to develop the drop-up, and this is an example of the provision of local forecast indicators from smallholder farmers in the outskirts of Tamale in northern Ghana, in several communities. And at the same time, besides collecting the local weather forecast, we also built the capacity of farmers to receive, to understand the scientific weather forecast when it comes to terms of probability, predictability of rainfall, and terms that they are not the easiest terms to understand. We had a lot of focus group discussions prior of developing the app, or during also the process of developing the app. First of all, we mobilized the capacity of people towards weather, water, and climate procedures. Why weather, climate? And knowing in advance what will happen is important for agricultural decision making. We also build the capacity of individuals towards the use of information communication technologies, ICT, and the use of smartphones and the apps. Why it is important to enhance their digital literacy, because they can find all this information within the app, but also beyond the app in the long term, as we saw. At the same time, we co-developed water and climate and agricultural advisory services based on the weather forecast. Receiving weather forecast or giving your own is one thing, but what do you do afterwards? That's another thing. We spend a lot of time in the communities discussing all the adaptation options and everything, what meant to them. For example, for me, a very high rainfall would be much different than very high rainfall for someone in Ghana. For Ghana, my very high rainfall would be for them something around medium, a margin, an amount. Now, the drop-up, this is in a nutshell the app. When you go in the app, besides the fact that you can read the weather forecast, you can receive the weather forecast, you can also give yours. You can select whether it will rain or not and how much it will rain. And you see the low, medium, high, and very high here is my example that I described you before. These margins were developed with the farmers in northern Ghana, and they are different from the amounts that they are developed, for example, for Wageningen, that I do it with my students. Then in panel number B, people select the indicators, they submit, and they can see the forecast, the indigenous or the local weather forecast from their community as well. This is my last slide. We have a guide of the drop up, of course. When we build the capacity of people, we also have a guide to continue in the longer term. We are applying the app besides Northern Ghana, also in Kenya and Zimbabwe, and through other projects in many other locations of the world where people practice rain-fed agriculture. It's free for use. You just need to give me your coordinates so I can add it in the app. And I would leave it here, and thank you. And maybe I could answer some questions from the chat, if it's.
Yes, I do see one question from the chat from Teresa, who's asking that what the difference is between co-creation, co-design, and co-production in these contexts.
Yeah, Teresa, this is a very good question. I'm not going to give an elaborate answer, because if someone from the chat is a social scientist, they would very much argue with my answer. So I'm not going to get it right. These are different terms, the co-creation, co-design, and co-production, that indicate the degree of participation of the end users, of the users of climate services. I don't like the expression end users, within the climate service that you want them to use. When it comes to co-creation, I mean, from a theoretical point of view, means regular two-way communication without having in mind, I am going to develop an app. You start from a blank page, and that increases the ladder of participation or decreases. For example, when it comes to co-production, you have in your mind the drop-up, but then you co-produce what type of information needs to be there. So I think it's terminology. There's a lot of literature about that. I'm going to leave it here.